So we are now up for the Q&A, and the panelists have taken their seat. So I would like to start with, there are a few questions online. Are there also questions in the audience? Yes, please.
Hi, my name is Rada from Karolinska Institute, Sweden. Thank you all for your presentations. My question is, so we know that hepatocellular carcinoma is, we know a lot of somatic mutations that are driving HCC. Cholangiocarcinoma is considered as less of a genetically driven cancer. Do you think that it's the nature of cholangiocarcinoma, or do you think that novel methods like long-read sequencing can reveal some more genetic aberrations related to cholangiocarcinoma? I'm guessing I'm basically asking, is it worth to study cholangiocarcinoma again genetically, but using a new method, which is the long-read sequencing?
Yeah, it's on. Yeah.
So I think what the key difference is in HCC, we know that there are predominantly, we think about them as being about 20 actionable mutations, but none of these have really been druggable. And I think that's one of the key differences that Professor Khan also pointed out in cholangiocarcinoma. And I very briefly went over it, but there's been quite extensive profiling of cholangiocarcinoma. And I think one of the key things is that we've got actionable mutations, particularly the FGFR fusion, the IDH mutations, so actually they're targetable drug mutations, and there's new mutations that have also new drug treatments that are coming through looking at those mutations. I think the idea of long coding RNA I think is a really interesting one. I don't think that we should long read sequencing. I don't think there's it has been extensively studied, but I think no one's going to stop anyone from doing more work. But I think the actual sequencing of cholangio has been done extensively. Would you agree with that? I don't think there's any.
I would agree. I would agree with that. I think that sort of has been done. You could potentially do more, but what benefit one would get from it, it's difficult to predict. I wouldn't be very hopeful of big gain from that, but I might be wrong. But as the other thing I'd just say is that, as Professor Bridgewater said in his talk yesterday, it's very tempting to look at a simple pathway, right? Oh, there's this one mutation, you do this, and then everything gets better. Whereas what's actually, as he showed in his talk, actually, if you look at the complexity of everything, you knock out one mutation, or you treat one target, you don't know what the ripple effect is in everything else. So true molecular biology is like an orchestra of stuff happening. Yeah.
And if I may add to this question, because what I think is that we see a selection bias, because the majority of patients do not even be molecular analyzed. And when we say there is a frequency of 20% of IDH, I doubt this, because IDH1 and 2 and FGFR2 fusion are a prognostic factor. So the patients we see and have analyzed have those factors. I'm not quite sure if we look at 100% of those patients that we see the frequency. So I'm also seeing the downsides of these analysis, let's say. But there are lots of questions, because you raised the subject. A lot of people stood up, so maybe we give the audience a chance to ask those questions, please.
Hi there, I'm Andrea Sheardown, and I'm a cholangiocarcinoma survivor. And obviously you've talked about liver cancer in general being the third most common cancer, and now the AMMF's white paper has alluded to over 50% of all cases of liver cancer now attribute to cholangiocarcinoma. But from the patient's side of it and the frustrations, it's how are you going to get more of the liver specialists to actually recognise that 50% of their patients going forward, coming through the doors, are going to be people like me with cholangiocarcinoma, and yet only 20% of us get access to a treatment plan? Are you seeing more people wanting to specialise in this field now because obviously the data is confirming there's a need for them too. It's just from a patient side, it's still very frustrating that there's some great treatments that you're talking about today, but we can't even get a foot in the door to access them. Because I even spoke to a liver specialist last week, hepatocellular, and we were chatting about the AMMF conference and me coming here and the white paper, and he said, what about the white paper? What is the white paper? And I obviously pointed out these facts, and I felt really shocked that I was pointing the facts out to somebody in a senior role dealing with liver cancer.
Should we get Dr. Suddle to answer this, HCC point of view?
No, I think you make some really important and valid points. It's interesting that as a hepatologist, hepatologists are central to the management of HCC. It occurs in the context of chronic liver disease. As we've heard, a lot of cholangiocarcinoma occurs in the context of chronic liver disease. And yet, apart from people like Shahid, not many, most centres you'll have a surgical pathway, an oncological pathway, but not that appreciation necessarily of the underlying chronic liver disease and the risk factor that poses. So absolutely agree with you. It's spreading the message and making sure that we develop services which are aligned to what patients need.
Thank you. John has another question, and then I will go to the online questions. Please, John.
Thank you. Just in response to the earlier question about genomics, and so you're spot on. Genomics probably bottomed out now. I mean, it's been, these cancers have been pretty well sequenced. The growth area is in the new drugs, as we've discovered in ABC10. Not only are the available drugs in study being used, but actually the information, the data from the sequencing is permitting the patient to go into other studies of other compounds. So that's where the growth area is. In terms of the discovery, and as I say, I think the genomics probably bottomed out now. It's going to be, the discovery area is going to be epigenetics and proteomics.
Okay, so we're going to take one online question before coming back to the floor. So the question, and maybe this might be for Dr. Sharma, while CCA has a broad genetic background, there appears to be a co-occurrence of certain mutations. So should we start to think about clustered co-occurrence mutations as a way to better understand the heterogeneity of the disease?
Clustered So what was the last bit? Clusters?
So should we think about co-occurring mutations in combination to think about?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's very much so. And these mutations don't happen in isolation. I think that's the other thing to say, that it's not just one. You just don't have one mutation per cancer. I think that's unusual. These are very heterogeneous tumours. So yeah, absolutely. I do think a lot of them might harbour one or two or three mutations or even more. Whether or not they harbour those actionable mutations is a different question. So you can sequence an entire cancer and see X number of mutations. It's just whether or not you're harbouring those actionable mutations that we now know are targetable.
If I may add to this as a question, so we have seen that the large duct and the small duct type is predictive of the mutations. So I'm just wondering, and I would even like to raise people's hands, so how many MDTs will do this as, okay, this is a small duct or this is a large duct tumor at the first presentation when the pathologist already has looked at these. So how many MDTs put this as a factor of discussion? How many? So that is a very small proportion. And I'm asking this because if I understand correctly, this is a predictor of the prognosis and the chance of mutation. So that might mean, I'm just calling to get time as a factor, so it might mean what do we have to put patients into a clinical trial with IDH if we do know that it's actually a large duct, so are we should we first do the algorithms better to fasten things up for patients.
We, with my hepatology hat on, we know that small duct PSC is relatively rare, and patients with small duct PSC are much less risk of both liver cancer and colon cancer compared to large duct PSC. So I would certainly stratify them in my clinic. I don't know if Abid would agree with that, but you're right. Well, if they develop the cancer, then we don't really.
We certainly don't look at it that from a histological point of view, and we probably should.
Very quickly, just take a last question from the floor before closing.
Hello, my name's Kevin Gaston. I'm from the University of Nottingham. I want to do a brave thing. I'm going to take issue with the panel and with John. I don't think we've looked at the mutations enough at all. And are you aware of any larger studies? So, I mean, these mutations are at low frequency, and if you study a low number of samples, like 100, the study is not sufficiently powered to get a good idea of the mutations. So I think a lot of these differences are going to disappear with time, and that we're going to find out that actually they're not all that different. And I guess that's just a hand grenade. It's not so much a question, it's more of a hand grenade.
I think Heinz Joseph makes an important point about saying that the mutational rate that we talk about is sort of self-selected patients who are entering trials. And I think it's only until we are doing widespread molecular profiling on all patients as part of the MDT discussion. What's the CA19-9? What's their age? What's their performance status? What's their molecular profiling? That's the only until we do that are we really going to know fully what the true picture is in all the patients, I think.
Yeah, so there's lots of work to do, if I understand correctly. And this is also stimulation. My background is personally to do biobanking for rare cancers. So that means we need to dig the gold, as we say. And the stimulation I'm giving here is to do data analysis one, but actually, as we heard yesterday, a lot of tissue is being stored. So we can go back to the tissue which has been stored for decades, actually, to do the work we're just talking about. If I may conclude this as a statement.
Okay, so if there are no further questions either online or from the floor, we're going to close this session, and I'd love to thank Dr. Suddle, Dr. Khan and Professor Sharma for such great talks. Thank you very much.